vested in this district as a parent, as a resident, as a retired teacher, a parent of a current teacher who's in the classroom that I was in. And so not only am I just vested in this district, I am 100% committed to our students all over the nation feeling safe, and what can we do about increasing that feeling of safety. I'm also concerned, I have concerns that I bring tonight about the Guardian Plan, that without due diligence, and this is one effort I believe at achieving due diligence before anyone makes any decision on arming any non-law enforcement officers on our campuses, that we have some things to look at. I think there's a sort of a lack of academic and objective research right now just because of time. And we know very little about the effectiveness of arming educators as it applies to our children's development, the learning outcomes, the finances, the cost, the additional responsibilities, and the increasing anxiety on campuses. There's a great deal of fear, but very little objective research, and therefore tonight we must be transparent, we must encourage questions, and we must entertain multiple points of view. I'm not alone with these concerns. I think many of our surveys say that there's a lot of people concerned, but also the National Education Association, the National Association of School Principals, School Psychologists, the National Association of School Resource Officers, the National Association of Elementary School Principals. My son's in medical school, and I know the medical community and public health officials, not to mention many, many students, teachers, and parents who have actually experienced the trauma of school shootings, have all taken a very public stand against arming educators or anyone who doesn't serve in an official capacity of law enforcement. And I'm also the sister of a lifetime DPS and then U.S. Marshal who is not in favor of arming laymen without some very, very transparent information to be delivered. Our own community reflects the nation, that about a little over half of parents of school-aged children that respond nationwide to such surveys, like our own community, have expressed great concern and are not in favor of arming educators. I don't want fear to fuel an argument that more guns mean our children are more protected. Because in fact, I think the little data that's out there tends to say there's a much greater chance of a negligent discharge or misplaced weapon. I recently found an article by the Associated Press from May that said since 2014, there have been more than 30 gun-related accidents on school campuses that involved adults who were legally carrying a weapon. American Academy of Health Behavior indicates that approximately, and you may speak to this, 10% of firearm homicides of American law enforcement officers are actually committed using their own service weapons that have gotten away from them in that 7 feet of danger zone. And so we know that we can't guarantee, right, any type of more guns are going to keep our kids any more protected. That's what the medical community and a lot of emergency rooms, my son's studying emergency medicine, and emergency room doctors say there's just this logical thing that it's called injury epidemiology, and the logic is that if you increase the source of an injury in an environment, you're going to increase the number of injuries. It's just sort of a logical way of thinking about that. There is data from the schools who have come from. I think that there's a good diligence in hearing what schools like Sandy Hook have said about what they learned as far as what did they have in place and what measures. And from what I understand in a recent Washington Post article, they have pointed to some simple but effective drills for rapid lockdown, doors being bolstered with easy to use and very, very quick responses, drills that don't just happen during the school day when a student is already in a classroom, but drills that make students feel very safe and secure about knowing where to go. There was a potential shooting in Northern California this past year where a man had already shot like 4 people and was heading to a campus at the beginning of the school day, and because of the practice that they had in place, they were able to issue a one-time emergency panic button, and in 48 seconds get every kid off the playground and into a locked and secured classroom door. And he shot through one door, couldn't get in anywhere, and left and shot himself. So I think there's something to be said about learning that it's not more guns and it's not more technology, and it's about simple and effective drills and in place.
Okay, thank you, Laura. David.
Good evening. Thank you. We have a moderator, a police officer, counseling lady, Mary Beth, and a school teacher. And then they're all experts in their field, and then you have me. I'm not an expert at anything at all except building fences and construction work. But I've been in a situation where I would say nobody in their right mind would ever want to be in. So as we listen to what's going on, I would just say, yes, I'm interested in an unbelievable amount of training going on in any school staff or school teachers or anybody else besides police, or including police, school police, being trained and trained well. And that's not just a quick course, and update training regularly. I think they should be compensated for it. And I think the mental criteria that a teacher or staff would have to be evaluated to make sure that they could handle whatever situation comes up, or there's a good prospect that they could handle it. But until all those statistics that were just given, until shooting starts, she said, we don't want to scare anybody. I don't want to scare anybody. Well, until the shooting starts, I don't care if it's 15 seconds or 11 minutes in my case, help may be on the way, but help coming and getting there in time to save lives is what we should be most interested in. And if we took the Santa Fe shooting, that shooter had a shotgun with double-aught buckshot, went right through doors, cinder block. I've been in 2 meetings actually 2 personal meetings in Santa Fe in the last year, and I was at the governor's roundtable. And those students, for a 2-hour meeting that lasted 6.5 hours, the governor was extremely gracious and patient. Those 48 students that came, all but one, were pleading for more security and pleading for teachers and staff, unaware to them who, but to have more armed personnel and teachers and staff armed. Until you've been shot at and you can do nothing, you are 100% helpless, crawling on the floor, running and ducking and diving. Until that happens to you, you'll understand what I'm saying. And I I pray to God it never happens to anybody in this area or anywhere again. But judging from this past year, since our shooting, since the Las Vegas shooting, Parkland, Maryland school, or the Maryland newspaper, Santa Fe, Orlando, I could just go on and on. They're just Pittsburgh, Oakland, Thousand Oaks, California, on and on in just 1 year. Until it happens, you just don't know what it feels like to not have somebody there with a gun to back you up. I thank you.
Thank you, David. Yes. Thank all of you for your opening remarks. I wonder if we should just engage in an educational moment first. Does everybody in the audience understand the 2 ways school districts can move forward with arming teachers, the Vanguard and Marshall program, or is that something we should talk about? Would anybody on the panel like to take that on and what the difference between them is? The Marshall program has existed for a while. It's a state program. State funding is available. There's a minimum of 80 hours of training required versus the Vanguard program, which is as small as 15 hours. It's not state funded. District trustees are actually allowed to waive that very much local control. So those are the 2 ways that you can move forward to legally arm teachers. And I wonder if any of you have any thoughts about either of those approaches or methods.
Well, Texas law, I will tell you, I'm an expert on Texas law, but the way I understand it, the Guardian program, which is what they're talking about here,
Guardian, excuse me, that's correct.
allows them, and here's some, fact sheet put out by the superintendent, his staff, and Ashley at the district office, why they're considering that plan and not the Marshall plan. It's locally controlled. You've got firearms instructors within the police department that can provide the training for the officers. There's three things that come in my mind, that come into play whenever you're talking about handling a firearm, regardless of who you are, regardless if you're a law enforcement officer, regardless if you're a private citizen on the street. And those three things are this. You've got to understand the mechanics of how to handle that firearm safely. That's number one, first and foremost. Can I be able to handle it safely, load it safely, hit the target, all things that are required for just mechanically handling a firearm. Then you've got to understand the legal aspect that comes into play. When can I use that firearm? When am I authorized to do so? And understanding what the law says and how to apply that force should, Lord forbid, you ever have to use it. And then the third thing that comes in there is the moral code or the mental code. Do I have the mental stability to do this if this occurs? Because you got to think about, we all think about the scenario of the bad guy or bad person coming in the door. Typically I say bad guy because most of the time it is male. Statistics tell us that. There's data that backs that up. But when that person comes in, you know, you say the reply is, well, you have a good guy with a gun to defeat that bad guy with a gun. If that bad guy with a gun comes in where the good guy with a gun is at the time, they're fortunate enough to be close by, and do they have the mental wherewithal? This is not a box. This is not something where we have a perfect scenario of somebody coming in and into a classroom and everything's sanitized. It can happen during a class change. It can happen out here on the football field. It can happen in a vocational shop. It can happen in the district meeting. There's all kinds of different scenarios there. You've got to be ready for every single one of those. And can that person who has known a kid forever, if that, and I say kid, if that young person comes in and that person is doing harm to others, can that person stop and take their life if they have to? So there's those three things that have got to be in play there. And from talking with staff here, they've got a good plan. They've got a good baseline to get started. One of the key things you do is you make sure you have proper policies in place. And they've got a really, really good start here on a policy. It needs a little bit of refinement, but they always do when they're in draft form to make sure that they've got the policies and procedures in order and they're working on that. But if you don't have all those three things, then I always suggest not to handle a firearm, regardless of who you want. You're thinking about carrying one.
I'm still unclear why to go the Vanguard route or the Guardian route rather than the Marshall Plan. It seems to me that not only do you not get state funding, but you're trying to convince your citizens to let the district arm teachers with less training than they would get if there was the Marshall Plan imposed.
Well, the way I understand, I'm not going to get into that. I don't know the local politics here as far as who's funding what. I'm just going to speak to you about what I know about training and active threats and that sort of thing you're involved with as we go through there. But it's my understanding they plan to far exceed that level of training that's required by that the Guardian Plan or Vanguard Plan.
Does anyone want to comment on that before we
There's a
move
couple
on?
of other things that I understand, and I can certainly be corrected. I believe, from what I understand with the Marshall program, there's a limited number of marshals per set number of students, whereas the Guardian Plan is, I guess, would be deemed by the approving board. They can deem, I think the FAQ says,
I think it's 1 per 400 for Marshall.
well, for the marshal, but the Guardians, I believe our FAQ says as many as deemed necessary. And so my question is, how do we deem that what's necessary? A 1-to-1 ratio, a one-armed adult? I mean, that's an extreme, but I think the Guardian program allows the district to make that choice. I'm wondering too about the uniformity of like weapons and ammunition, or I think the Guardian program a district would make all of those decisions. I think there would be costs involved for the actual volunteers in our district if they were to go with the Guardian program. And I don't know from a law enforcement, does that complicate things to have a variety of weapons? I think the Marshall program says that anyone who works directly with students as part of their day job for most of the day would not be able to carry it on their person.
Right. They
They
have
have
to
to be
lock
locked
their
away.
guns
That's the
up.
Marshall program. And I think those are interesting things to look at because those would be safety measures, right? That all of us that have grown up in a rural area and have been taught to, here's how you handle a gun appropriately and safely in your home, and so that you're minimizing any risk of accident.
I wanted to draw that point out that you just made, Laura, but in fact, the Marshall Program requires people not to be walking around armed amid students, and a lot of people would criticize that and go, what good is a gun in a lockbox in an emergency situation? The Guardian program, that you're allowed to be armed at all times, and that's probably the preference of the district, is to keep people armed.
Let me say this. Dave and I were in the back room a while ago. The alarm went off. Didn't know what was going on. It was a test. I didn't know that. He didn't know that. Here I am sitting here with a survivor of a mass shooting. And the first thing I start looking for, I don't have. Because I didn't know what was going on. I said, is this something real world? What's going on? I have my trusty flashlight that I don't go anywhere without. Okay? But that's not going to do me any good in an armed situation. And I tend to agree with that. What good is it if you're not going to have it there? But I will tell you this, from reading the policy today, they have prescribed the type of weapon you can use. They talk about having common ammunition. They talk about the caliber of that weapon. And like I said, there's some things that
Now, what's your reference here?
I'm referencing the draft policy, which I don't think has been made public yet, but certainly.
So there is a draft policy that the district has come up with. Has that been shared publicly with people? No.
Just as a panelist, I wanted to be able to see it because I had some hard questions myself about it that I wanted to educate myself about before. So those policies, those things, they're in there. And the other thing that's very important too, when I went to Israel, I learned from the Israelis, they don't carry their weapons. The vast majority of them don't. There's certain elements that do. They don't carry their weapons what's considered in battery or around the chamber. That's one of the questions that I asked today. Would they be carrying a weapon around the chamber? They would not. It would be out of battery. In other words, you have to charge that weapon. That weapon was taken away from you. Somebody, unless they knew absolutely what to do, could not use that weapon against you.
Well, we don't have a district representative on the panel, but I suppose if there's a draft policy out there being debated internally, that citizens are going to want to see that. And I meant to mention at the outset, the school board's meeting Thursday, January 17th. They're going to take this issue up in executive session, which most of you know means behind closed doors. They can't vote behind closed doors. They won't. There's no plans to even vote. It's not on the agenda, but they will be discussing it. They could come out of that executive session and decide to address the public on what was discussed behind closed doors and what conclusions they're reaching prior to that being on the board. So that's January.
Also, this is a draft.
Right, a draft. I also just wanted to say, I was remiss in the beginning for not saying thank you to Sheriff Salazar for being with us. I'm really impressed that you're out here with us tonight, and we all appreciate that and probably feel a little bit safer. So, I think one of the things, and I'll just put this in front of everybody, that the Roland Toscanos of the world are having to do, they're having to break the news to people that no matter where you are on this issue, it's going to cost money. Even if you don't arm teachers, it's going to cost money, whether you go to metal detectors, the state's talking about funding some pilot programs and some grant programs, but it's peanuts compared to what the 1,200 districts would want if they were going to engage the next level of security for their campuses and security precautions. So it seems to me that number one, we all have to come to terms with the fact that there's a new cost here to educating and protecting children. A question I would have is arming teachers peace officers on the cheap? Is it peace officers light? We'd certainly never propose that we're going to save money by having campus police start to teach the AP courses at school. So do we want teachers to be police officers? And Chief, you know as a police officer that not everybody that wants to wear a badge and carry a gun gets to, because they wash out, because their personalities, their psychology profile is not suitable to be somebody that we trust with a gun or to trust under that highly emotional moment where you have to fight or flight. And so are we asking too much of people that came into public education to teach children to be with them to suddenly adopt this completely different persona when we would never expect police officers to become teachers? if we already have a police force, this may be a different way of adding it. Why not tell citizens the cost of doing business in the world we live in means adding licensed peace officers, which means, let's just say 11 campuses for East Central, however many peace officers they now have, they're going to have to add additional ones to elevate the level of security.
I'm never going to argue with having extra peace officers. I wish I had them every single day. I've got enough to do the job. I wish I had more every day. You don't ever want to force this situation on anybody. They don't embrace the idea. If they don't have the mental wherewithal and the ability to do it, then certainly you're not going to ask them. But there are those statements of folks in education that I know people in my own district that would love to be able to do this.
Does that mean they're suited to do it?
I think certain people are. There's a lot of retired law enforcement that are educated, a lot of retired military that are educated. But once again, are you suited to do it? I mean, if you're not comfortable handing a weapon to somebody, and you don't, obviously there's going to have to be a lot of screening here. And not everybody that's going to want to do it is going to be able to do it. That's why you have that process. But is that officer going to be in the right place at the right time? That's the key thing. I mean, we can't be everywhere at once, and these things happen so quickly. It's a force, to me, it's a force multiplier. You get the right people that are willing to embrace it and willing to do it. It's a force multiplier. It's going to be a force multiplier for the school district that choose to do it. It's going to have to be done right.
Okay, let me get some of the other panelists in on that whole question of teachers as peace officers versus beefing up the security, the professional security force that you have in these 198 school districts, mostly urban districts or large districts. Does anybody have any thoughts on that one way or the other?
Well, Bob, I would say that we are always in favor of more security where we can fit that into the budget. But I'd like to speak to something a little different as it relates to the Guardian or Marshal program. And that is that there needs to be stringent background checks. There need to be annual background checks. And I'm sure that's all what's being considered today, though I haven't seen the policy or the draft that's being considered or talked about. Stringent and comprehensive psychological testing.
This is for the Marshall program here, Beth.
For Marshall, our Guardian
Or
program.
either one.
Yes, the Guardian program gives you more flexibility as a district as to what you can do. The Marshall program is more defined. But there are probably many reasons why one might be preferred over another, and I'm not knowledgeable enough to speak to that tonight. But I can say from a psychological perspective that a comprehensive psychological assessment and testing does not necessarily provide you with a full battery of mental health background. So there's an enhanced opportunity that a third party can offer that does both the mental health assessment as well as the psychiatric complete assessment and can give you more information. And as the district looks to consider something like this, it's something that they obviously want to have. Other things, training, of course, you talked about that. The process of looking at, just to comment on a Guardian or Marshall program that I think that the school board would want to be looking at is that previous professional experience, as Mr. Ellis had indicated, military or police officers, people that already come with core competencies in those areas. That might be something to at least consider and have in your exploration toolbox as you're talking about things, so mitigating the risk.
A couple of things I want to kind of point out. From what I understand and talking with my brother, when you're carrying a weapon, a firearm all the time, you're scanning. You're constantly scanning for threats. It feels like that's two separate jobs. I mean, that's why the thorough training, the mental health assistance that police officers, law enforcement officers get. If there was an incident, as far as I understand, they get immediate care for that, for working through that and processing that, because that is such a strain. And it sounds to me like as we talk about all of these comprehensive psychological tests that we currently don't even have in place just for our educators that are going to be in the classroom with our students, this is a lot of extra funds. And again, I'm thinking about why do we want to take a chance on people that is not their trained experience, that is not the profession they went into, and it competes with an ability in it, and it may change a relationship between a student, and even if he doesn't know who's got the gun, there's that, does she? And then finally, I feel like, I mean, we could use the same mental health bolstering and resources for our own students through extra counselors and school psychologists and art programs and taking care of our kids. We are a trauma-informed district, and what seems to be in line with that would be taking care of our kids' mental health as well as their physical surroundings and their physical environment. And it just feels like to me, and I know it does to a lot of folks, that those fundings would be best served directing into our immediate students and not a what if for something that's never going to be a guarantee. That, again, more armed individuals is not going to guarantee that any kind of prevention. And our officials, our law enforcement officers who do such a wonderful job. And I can tell you that many of you out here may know these days when we have had threats on social media in our district, and it's a low attendance school day, and the kids are nervous. And what we've been able to do, our officers have been visible, they've been present, our administrators are out, our teachers are out, they're visible, they're present, they're talking to kids. We've called in Bear County, they've provided extra resources, and it has felt like an excellent response to what we've done.
Let me ask you a question to the scenario that I brought up on the party. We talked about earlier having a good civil discourse, and I really appreciate that when we got it here. Had I walked around the corner a while ago and there had been an emergency, and David and I walked around the corner, and had there been something really bad, I'm glad we got some law enforcement folks in here, but I didn't know where they were at the time. Had I walked around the corner and something bad had been going on, what could I have done about it?
What could you have done about it if you walked around the corner? Same thing any of us would do if we walked around the corner unarmed down the street or anywhere.
Right.
You call for help, you sound an alarm.
Right.
You
So that
use
level-
whatever self-defense techniques.
Right. Well, I've been trained so much that probably what I'm going to do is, as foolish as this may sound, I hope and pray, because nobody really knows what they're going to do for the moment of truth when it's tested. But I hope I'm going to do right as I've trained, but probably I'm going to try to do my best to try to mitigate that and try to stop that shooter even without a firearm. But I'm not going to be very successful against somebody who's armed, no matter how well trained I am. And you brought up something a while ago that's very important, that I think needs to go hand in hand with any of this, and that's the mental health aspect. Now, are you involved in any threat assessment stuff with the district, or to look for those behaviors? I think that when you train these people not only to carry a weapon, the teeth that are in the sheepdog is no good without any teeth. And if you put the teeth in the sheepdog, you also need to teach that sheepdog what to look for. Okay? And those signs and symptoms of somebody who's headed down that pathway of violence. People just don't snap. That is a misnomer. That is a myth. Okay? There's tons of studies out there to prove that. I was involved with a panel of folks that were involved in the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center that were involved with Johns Hopkins University. And there's a lot of folks, including Dr. Gene Geisinger, that had done a lot of study work on people that are headed down that pathway of violence. They don't snap. So to look for those signs and symptoms. And there is no profile. There is no profile for somebody who's going to do this. But there are key behaviors that folks display to bring them to your attention before you ever get to that point.
I think, Chief, that's what and we need to talk about this. And almost everyone we look at, there were plenty of ample warning signals that were ignored before people got to the point of being an active shooter. And I think to Laura's point earlier, the lack of resources that people have for addressing mental health issues, psychological issues on campus, the very enormous workloads that guidance counselors have in terms of number of students, that we just don't get the opportunity to hit the pause button and really help some of these kids that need help before they spiral down to the point where they're willing to harm themselves or harm others. Mary Beth, you
I would say, Bob, that we know that 1 in 5 children suffer from depression. That's a national statistic. We know that there is definitely behaviors, and we can go back post events, and we can look at what has happened in the past and those warning signs that were there, but they weren't identified prior to the event. They were not acted upon necessarily prior to the event. I think it's very important at this juncture to mention that East Central has been nationally recognized for EC Cares. And EC Cares, if you're not familiar, is a program that has been fully committed and instituted to in our district. I was